Hello and welcome. You are watching The Mining Show, brought to you by Blytheweigh on Core TV. I'm Charlie Gibson. Now, as regular viewers will know, the last few weeks have not been that kind to the commodity markets. All that talk of a trade war and a rift between the United States and China has caused commodity prices to just come off a touch. And that, of course, has had an inevitable effect on equity prices. And sometimes when that happens, I feel a little blue and I listen to my favourite music. And one of my favourite songs is Georgia is on My Mind. And when Georgia's on my mind, I can think of no one else other than Georgian mining. And joining me now, all the way from his home in Portugal, is the Chief Executive, is Mike Struthers. Mike, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Charlie. Yeah, thanks. Good to be with you.
And good to be with you. And I notice, apart from the fact that Georgia is obviously on my mind, and I should point out here that it's a different Georgia. At least I assume it's a different Georgia. It's not the one in the United States. It's the one in the Caucasus.
Indeed, I believe it is a different one, yeah.
But you have today put out a works program on your Bolnisi project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I suppose that if I can just back up a bit, the news that obviously everybody is waiting for from us is the award of our exploration permit. So let me just speak to that briefly before we go on to the technical work. On the permits, I had a meeting with the Deputy Minister of Economy on the 10th of August. It was a very positive meeting. He understands our application and the urgency that we have in wanting to get this resolved. So he undertook to discuss that with the new minister as soon as he can. The new Minister of Economy joins the cabinet from McKinsey's in Moscow. He had quite a long career with them in Moscow. But unfortunately, he's not going to be available, not full-time in his role, until the 10th of September. But we're using all avenues we can to try to get this resolved as soon as possible. I have to admit the holiday season isn't helping. But look, we've got really good local support. We know the mining agency is supportive of our application as well. So we're still very confident. We'll get this resolved as soon as we can, and then we can push ahead with the work program. As I mentioned in the release, though, I do want to thank our shareholders for their tremendous patience in waiting for us to get this resolved. Onto the technical work that we've been doing. We've got some new staff and leadership in our team in Georgia. So aside from naturally reviewing the work that has been done before, we wanted to take some steps forwards. And I wanted to share the work we've been doing with our shareholders, because it's starting to illustrate what the KB, the Kavema Bolnisi East project, will actually look like. And we've not really had that before, and that work has been pending until recently, when we've been able to strengthen the team and start to get our heads around, some of the details and the options that we have. It's all early stage, but this is a snapshot of some ongoing work, but it's contributing to the work program that we'd set out before anyway. All of this is very good preparatory steps for the feasibility study, which which is a part of that program and which we'll be kicking off later in the year.
Mike, I suppose a cynic might say, it sounds a bit cart before horse. Albeit in the horse in the form of your exploration permits is something that's slightly out of your control. But what you seem to be doing is putting together, I suppose, aspects of an operation, of a project, before you finish the exploration. Does that make sense?
It makes sense as a question, but what I can explain is that the permits that we're talking about are for the license area as a whole. So we have a very large area in Georgia, 860 square kilometers. It's actually just over 1% of the country. Within that large license area, we have over a dozen known targets which have been subject to a variety of historical work going back to the Soviet era. Some of them are more advanced than others. This particular project, KB East, The work program is actually to do an infill drilling program to upgrade the resource category, and to give us a definitive resource, which is the basis for the feasibility study. The permits that we require basically allow us to do work on all of our projects, which means that on some of the others, the 6 month work program is validation drilling of historical data. So those projects are at earlier stages. But the KB East is quite advanced, and as I say, we've got infill program, we've got metallurgical test work, etc. There's a logical workflow taking us through feasibility study and a go no go decision. So the question is a sensible one, but it's actually the permits. We require the permits for a whole variety of reasons, covering field work, which is really greenfield exploration, all the way through to being able to do infill programs for a feasibility study. So a very wide spectrum of activity, but we still need the same permits to be able to do any of the field work in the license.
So if I to just put you sort of on the block here and say, what do you think the timelines are, and what are the milestones in the relatively near term? I'm talking in terms of months, that you expect in terms of receiving these exploration permits and then continuing with that exploration program?
Well, as I say, the Minister of Economy is full-time in his role on the 10th of September. Now, we've had protracted delays, with government in getting these permits resolved for a variety of reasons. I mean, the last hurdle we had, the previous Minister of Economy had endorsed our applications back in May, but then the Prime Minister and the Cabinet resigned, and the whole Cabinet has now been replaced. Some ministers maintained their portfolio, but there were a number of changes, and that's caused us these most recent delays. I expect that we'll be able to get the approvals we need soon after the Minister returns moves into his role full time. The work program we have agreed with our JV partner is initially for a 6-month period, and within that 6 months we complete the infill program. That's only a couple of months of drilling. We undertake metallurgical test work, we kick off an EIA, and we kick off the feasibility study. I'd expect that within that 6-month period we'll probably be perhaps about 2/3 of the way through the feasibility study. Of course, it's a little indeterminate right now, but roughly speaking, I don't suppose we'll have quite finished it, but we'll be well advanced in that study at the end of that 6-month period. But
can I ask, can you drill year round? It sounds fairly cold where you are in winter.
No, not at all. We're not impacted by the seasons. We're able to work all the year round.
So it doesn't matter if you get these permits on the 1st of December or whatever.
No, not at all. No, it doesn't constrain us at all. It's not as cold as you might imagine. We're fairly south in terms of Eastern Europe. So no, it gets chilly. You get a bit of snow on the peaks, but it doesn't stop us working.
So by the sounds of it, this is something you would like to see wrapped up and concluded by the end of the year. Would that be a reasonable timeline?
Well, as I say, if we can kick off the work, if we get the approvals we need, and we can kick off the work program, then we've got a 6-month program. So that would take us, from September, that'll take us through to March.
Yeah, I suppose I'd say, what I'm saying is you would expect the approvals before the end of the year? Would that be a reasonable expectation? Yes. Oh,
no, absolutely. I'd expect it much sooner than that. As I say, the minister's in his role mid-September. We're doing what we can to get a meeting with the minister, or to facilitate the process and get these approvals that we require. We've got a lot of support in government circles as well, including the agencies. So I don't anticipate it taking much longer. We're just being impacted at the moment by holiday season, by the new cabinet settling into their roles and things like that. So no, I'm sure that it'll be resolved sooner than the end of the year.
And then what about if we look in the longer term? How do you expect that, if you're starting the feasibility towards the end of this year, that's a 1-year process, so that would take us to the end of 2019. then?
Actually, yeah, no, Charlie, actually not, because the focus of the feasibility study is the oxide cap on this on a large sulfide body. The feasibility study will be a definitive study on the mining of the oxides, but we'll also have to consider, obviously, the scope of the future sulfides project. So it'll address both, but be focused on the mining of the oxides and the processing of that material at the partners, the sister company to our partners, which is only about 7 or 8 kilometers away. The design work that's required is actually quite straightforward. The illustrations that I provided in the press release really give a sense of what's required at the KB East site. It's very straightforward, with just a pit and some stockpile areas and a road that connects us to the processing facilities. So, and the layouts at their end are also equally as straightforward. So the feasibility study, I'm anticipating it's only about a 5-month period. So as I say, during the 6-month program after the infill drilling, we'll be well advanced through the study, but not probably not quite completed. By saying that, of course, there will be a further study, effectively an update to address the sulfides body, but that the sulfide body below requires a fair bit more drilling yet. This immediate program now aims to understand the actual extent of the sulfide body. And then obviously there'll be an infill program then to define the resource properly, and then be the basis for a further feasibility study on the mining and processing of that body.
Can I ask how you anticipate then, and granted with all of the caveats that you don't have the results yet from the exploration program, but would you anticipate then developing this project as an oxide project to then generate cash flow in order to fund the workup, if you like, of the sulfide project, or do you think you would develop it as an integrated, all singing, all dancing, oxide and sulfide project right from the start, but a bigger operation?
No, you're right. It's going to be phased. The oxide project will provide cash flow for the development of the sulfide project, and naturally, for geometrical reasons, obviously one precedes the other anyway. When we get the results of the drilling in this initial 6-month program for the sulfides, then we'll understand the true extent of it, and obviously then be able to determine how much extra drilling we would require to have a definitive resource on that sulfide project. So the project will be phased. The oxides will be able to start mining as soon as possible, once we go through all this that sort of logical work process. The sulfides will follow along on its tail, so we'll be drilling the sulfides while we're actually doing the construction and operating the oxides. So they will be phased.
So we got the one, then the other. So if we are looking at sort of feasibility study on the oxides sort of middle of next year, thereabouts, then towards the end of next year, raising finance and beginning to develop the project, 1 year construction time, so potentially first gold middle of 2020?
I think actually, Charlie, it'll be earlier than that, because the facilities that are required at KB East are pretty straightforward, so the construction time is going to be short. We have probably the largest item would be to prepare the haul road that will connect our project over to the processing facilities. But I don't anticipate a long construction period. I don't really want to share dates yet because it's a little bit early. What we want to do now is focus on getting the feasibility study moving, do the EIA. I mean, actually, we're not obliged to do an EIA for local permitting, but we'll naturally do one anyway. And I want to run that in parallel with the feasibility study. But having production in 2019 is entirely realistic. So I just want to get a bit more certainty on some of the details before I announce a date. But what we're focused on now is delivering. I mean, the company has raised expectations in the past about production dates which were frankly unrealistic, and my mission now is to is to provide advice that we are, sure that we will deliver on. We need to focus on delivery now, and that's what we're doing.
Excellent. All right. Well, Mike, thank you very much indeed. We wish you the very best of luck with that. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for here today on the Mining Show, brought to you by Blytheweigh on Core Finance. I'm Charlie Gibson. I'm feeling a little less blue than I was at the start of this programme. We'll be back next week, and until then, you have a very capital day.